Hello. It's a little while since I made one of these videos, but I thought it was time to do another one. And I wanted to just say a few words about the path, about the Buddhist path. The Buddha said that the path was the way to lead to liberation from suffering. So does the Noble Eightfold Path, the Four Noble Truths, the Threefold Way, Sila, Samadhi, Prajna, do these things, do they lead to freedom from suffering? The Buddha said so, but do we just take that as correct? How do we find out? Well, obviously, the way we find out is by setting out on the path, by learning to practice, by practicing, making practice an important part of our lives. That's the only way we'll find out if the Buddhist path to liberation does actually lead to liberation. So you may be someone who's beginning on the path, or you may be someone who is already quite experienced in the path. But sometimes I know in my own experience, I've wanted to know if there's some recognition of where I'm at. I don't mean recognition from other people, but some, knowledge in myself that some progress has been made on the path. And at the moment, with the pandemic that we're experiencing, the lockdown that we've been in for weeks and weeks now, that has really accentuated the need to practice, I think. But where are we at with our practice? So I just want to say a bit about my own experience of practice over many years. I've been practicing the Buddhist path for 4 decades now, which is quite a long time. And there's been times during those 4 decades when I've thought, hey, what's going on? Have I really made any significant change? What's really happening, or what has happened as a consequence of this practice? So first I want to say that at the beginning I was really delighted. I was really very joyful at the fact that I'd encountered a path, a method which showed me that there was at least a possibility of gaining some freedom from suffering. I was really excited about that, exhilarated, you could say. And so I threw myself into practice in the ways that I discovered at the time. Meditation and connection with people in the Sangha, listening to the Dharma, reading about the Dharma. So I did all those things in quite an intensive way. And the joy that I initially experienced, I guess it was an unintegrated joy. So I was not able to sustain it. Maybe it's a bit like, you fall in love and there's this fantastic feeling. The heart, the body, the mind, this feels really alive. But then it subsides and you can't really sustain that, or it's hard to sustain that level of intensity, that level of experience. So what happened for me over the next, quite a long time was that some difficulties kicked in to my practice, which of course is what happens when we practice. We experience the joy, but we also experience difficulties in ourselves of one sort or another. In terms of Vedana, or felt experience, sensations that we feel, we experience things as either pleasant or painful or neutral. Those are what in Buddhism are called the Vedanas. All experience is like that. We constantly shift between pleasant, painful and neutral. It takes a while to get used to that being the case. At first we might think, oh, I'm experiencing a lot of pain. Maybe I'm not on the path at all. Maybe I'm not practicing properly. But then something else, more fundamental in a way, deeper in our experience, also kicks in, which is our unconscious tendencies. These are the things which drive us in a particular direction, whether we want them to or not. So maybe an example of that, quite a mundane example, is you've just gone out of the house, you've locked the door, but you've only gone a few seconds up the road and you think, did I actually lock the front door? So you come back, you check, yes, you had locked the front door. All the time, you knew really that you had locked the front door, but there was something in you, something which almost made your body go back and check it, almost against your better judgment. So it's a deep anxiety there, which needed to do something at that time. In a way, that's a fairly lightweight example. There are much more serious things which our unconscious tendencies can lead to. But it does show how we are often driven or fueled by things which seem to be out of our control. And they seem to take our body, or the body, in my experience, seems to lead in spite of what we might think we ought to do or want to do or need to do. Our samskaras, as they're called in Buddhism, they want us to do something else. And we find ourselves led in that direction, whether or no. Another example is that part of us wants to meditate, actually genuinely wants to meditate, not just thinks that we need to meditate, but we want to meditate. We want that experience of sitting with ourselves, of being with our experience, of letting things unfold, developing more mindfulness, more metta. But instead of heading for the meditation cushion, we maybe find ourselves heading for the kitchen or the TV or computer or whatever it may be. So those are our unconscious tendencies. But of course, as we practice, those tendencies become more and more conscious. And then we become more and more able to make a better choice, a better informed choice about what we're going to do. In my early years of practice, I would say that my experience was like a civil war. There were just so many conflicts in myself. At the same time, I was aware of the Buddhist path and the ideal of the Buddhist path, you know, the striving for freedom from suffering, wanting to be awakened, enlightened, wanting to gain some kind of insight, wanting to develop compassion. There was all of that, but then there was the reality of dealing with the things which kicked into my mind, which came up from the depths. And because of those things, it took me a long time to get any kind of disciplined sort of practice. I was here and there with my practice. You know, sometimes I'd meditate, sometimes I wouldn't. But all the time I maintained some kind of a thread of practice. And often that thread was due to being in contact with people in the Sangha who were able to support me at those times when things were most difficult. So for quite a while then, I would say my early years of practice were they were hard work. There were some rewards, there were some pleasures to be obtained from it, but by and large there was hard work, and there was also a lot of darkness that came into my experience. I've talked about this before on other occasions, so I probably won't go into it now. But very gradually over a period of time, long period of time, probably a couple of decades, gradually things changed. Not that things necessarily became easier, but there was certainly less conflict. The civil war died away, died down, and there was only the occasional skirmish between the opposing forces, I would say. So things calmed down. I was able to develop a much more consistent, regular practice, and I definitely think that has borne fruit. I'm not making any claims to particular attainments or particular insights. All I'm saying really is that my experience has lightened very much. I'm much lighter in my being. I experience more and more positive mental states as opposed to dark and negative mental states. So the consequence of this is, coming back to my original question, does the path lead to freedom? I can't yet say in my experience that the path has led me to complete freedom, but what I can say is that my experience is gradually freeing up. Things are gradually becoming freer. I am seeing more deeply into the nature of things. I am seeing much more deeply that things are impermanent, things are changing, constantly changing. And I'm gradually developing some kind of openness to that, some kind of equanimity in the face of that knowledge of change. So, the reason I'm talking about all this is because if any of you have similar difficulties, or if any of you have the experience that I had where you knew about practice, but the civil war inside you was almost too strong to do anything about it, well, my suggestion is stay with it. You have to keep testing out the path. Don't just take the Buddha's word for it. Don't take my word for it. Just stay with the path, stay with your experience, work in whatever way you can, and eventually the work will become less work and more play. Go well on the path.